You are unfit to lead Americans. 38 million people heard J.D. Vance hurl those words at Jasmine Crockett. Live inside the U.S. Capitol. The chamber froze, anger erupted, and the nation trembled. What could she say in that moment to turn an insult into history? The gavel hadn't struck yet, but the room was already electric. Cameras locked on the witness table, waiting for the first move. Every seat was filled, every microphone live. J.D. Vance leaned forward, shoulders tight, eyes fixed on Jasmine like a predator. He wasn't here to debate. He was here to break her. You could feel it before he spoke. Jasmine sat steady, hands pressed to the desk, not a tremor in sight. She knew the strike was coming, and she knew the whole country was watching. The silence before the storm was deafening. Reporters shifted in their seats, pens frozen in midair. Lawmakers stopped their whispers. The air thinned as if the entire chamber was holding one breath, waiting for a spark to ignite. The red light on the camera blinked alive. Millions of eyes locked in. What would unfold here wouldn't just be politics. It could be history. Was this a debate or the start of a firestorm? J.D. Vance rose so fast his chair screeched against the floor. He leaned into the microphone until it trembled, his face sharp with anger. Then he fired the shot. You are unfit to lead Americans. The words detonated in the chamber. Gasps ricocheted off marble walls. It wasn't a statement, it was a sentence. A branding iron pressed in front of the whole nation. The attack didn't just target Jasmine, it aimed to strip her of legitimacy, live before millions. Senators stiffened. Some mouths hung open, stunned. Others exchanged quick glances, half smiles curling like they'd been waiting for someone to say it out loud. One aide dropped his notepad, the thud echoing louder than it should have. Reporters leaned forward, pens scratching in a frenzy. Headlines were already forming in their minds. Unfit, Crockett under fire. The cameras zoomed closer, desperate to capture every twitch of Jasmine's face, every flicker of doubt. And Jasmine sat there, motionless, her hands flat against the table, eyes fixed ahead. She didn't flinch, didn't lower her head, but the silence around her was suffocating, the kind that pressed down like weight on the chest. The whole chamber seemed to lean in, hungry to see if she would crumble. J.D. Vance didn't move either. He stood tall, jaw clenched, eyes locked on her. He looked like a man who believed he'd just ended a career with one word. For him, unfit wasn't an insult. It was a verdict. The silence stretched, unbearable. America waited. How could anyone come back from that word? The word hung like smoke, suffocating the chamber. Every eye locked on Jasmine, the room paralyzed. A reporter at the press table leaned to his colleague, whispering through dry lips. That word could end her career. The mic caught it faintly, the phrase spreading like wildfire across the gallery. The silence turned heavy, like glass about to shatter. Every eye drilled into Jasmine. Her fingers curled tight against the polished wood, knuckles whitening. She didn't speak, didn't blink, but behind her stillness burned a storm. Anger, resolve, memory. The kind of fire you don't see until it erupts. J.D. Vance leaned back slowly, satisfied, convinced he'd landed the final blow. His smirk said he thought the fight was over. But the longer Jasmine stayed silent, the more tension twisted in the air, and the more dangerous her calm began to look. A senator cleared his throat, then thought better of it. The audience leaned forward, straining for her first word, and the nation, millions glued to their screens, waited, knowing that the next sentence could define everything. Would she falter or rise? The chamber was still holding its breath when Jasmine moved. Slowly, deliberately, she pushed her chair back, the scrape of metal on marble slicing through the silence like a blade. Every camera lens tightened, every neck craned. The microphone caught the faint rhythm of her breathing, steady at first, then quicker, as if the nation could hear her heart. She placed both hands on the desk and rose to her feet, not rushed, not trembling, measured, like someone who knew the moment was bigger than fear. Her gaze swept the room, not at Vance, not at the senators, but through them, as if she was looking far beyond these walls. And in that pause, memory struck. She saw her grandfather, pushed off sidewalks during marches, called unworthy of the country he bled for. She saw her mother, ridiculed in public when she demanded equal pay for equal work. Words like unfit, undeserving, less than, echoes that had haunted her family for generations. The pain returned sharp, but it did not weaken her. It fueled her spine, tightened her jaw, steadied her voice. You could almost see the weight of those scars transform into armor right there, in real time. She wasn't just standing as Jasmine Crockett, she was standing as every ancestor who'd been told to sit down. J.D. Vance watched, waiting for collapse. But what he didn't realize was that silence had become her forge. Every second she refused to fall apart, the balance shifted. The insult meant to bury her was about to become her fire. Could history's scars become her weapon? Under the white heat of the lights, her voice finally rose. It didn't tremble, it didn't break, it carried. My grandfather was called unfit. My parents were called unfit. And now you call me unfit because I refuse to tear children from their mothers? The sentence cracked across the chamber like a whip. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The insult that Vance had hurled only moments ago now sounded flimsy against the weight of her words. It wasn't just a rebuttal. It was history demanding its due. She wasn't speaking for herself anymore. She was speaking for everyone who'd ever been branded less than. The cameras darted, desperate to capture every reaction. One senator pressed a hand over his mouth. Another shifted in his chair, suddenly uneasy. Reporters who'd been scribbling snide notes now froze mid-word, their pens hanging useless in the air. You could feel the narrative turning in real time, and everyone knew it. And outside, the impact was immediate. In the crowded hallway, a young mother with dark circles under her eyes clutched her toddler close. When Jasmine's words echoed through the speakers, she broke, tears streaming as she whispered, "She's speaking for us." Around her, strangers nodded, murmurs spreading like a current. Yes, she is. Inside, Jasmine leaned closer to the microphone, her eyes locked forward, unflinching. The chamber had been a courtroom for her humiliation. Now, with every syllable, she was flipping it into her stage of defiance. Her voice didn't just carry. It shook marble, shook pride, shook the pretense of civility that had allowed insults like unfit to live this long. Her fire had caught. The question now wasn't whether they heard her. The question was what her words would do to the room. Would her fire melt the chamber or ignite it? The chamber erupted, not with applause, not yet, but with whispers sharp enough to cut. Senators leaned into one another, voices low, frantic. Reporters scrambled, pens scratching like claws on paper. The sound wasn't chaos, it was awe struggling to breathe. J.D. Vance's face flushed crimson, jaw tight as stone. He shifted in his seat, trying to mask the fury boiling under his skin. His words had been meant to end her, but now it was clear they had only lit her fuse. The camera caught his clenched fists under the table, fingers digging into his palms. And then came the moment that no script could write. In the gallery, an older veteran with silver hair slowly rose to his feet. His lips trembled, his eyes filled, and for the first time that day, tears cut down his weathered face. He didn't speak. He only nodded once, firm toward Jasmine. That nod said everything. The chamber shifted. Energy rolled like a wave across the room. Some senators stiffened, others looked away, but no one could pretend they hadn't felt the quake. Even the marble walls seemed to hum with the weight of what had just been spoken. Jasmine stood steady, her presence filling every inch of that hall. Her voice still echoed in the minds of everyone there, reverberating long after the last word. What had begun as an accusation was now something far more dangerous, something unforgettable. Was this strength or the birth of a warrior? The chamber had barely settled when J.D. Vance snapped back to his feet. His chair slammed against the wood behind him, the echo cutting through the murmurs. He jabbed a finger toward Jasmine, his voice rising, sharp and venomous. "You betray our citizens for outsiders." He didn't stop there. Vance launched into numbers like bullets. Unemployment rates, crime statistics, border arrests. Each one hurled at Jasmine like proof, like chains meant to pin her down. His tone wasn't reasoned, it was prosecutorial, designed to put her on trial in front of the nation. Some senators nodded, pounding the desk in approval. Others erupted in groans, their voices layering into a storm of boos and shouts. The air grew hotter by the second. every breath tight, every second more combustible. It wasn't debate anymore. It was combat. Reporters leaned so far forward their chairs squeaked, scrambling to capture every line. Headlines shifted mid-sentence. Crockett under fire 1 second. Vance goes too far the next. Outside the chamber, the crowd pressed tighter against the barricades, reacting in real time to every word spilling from the speakers. Jasmine didn't move. She stayed rooted, eyes locked on Vance, absorbing the barrage like stone takes rain. But beneath the stillness, her chest rose sharper, her fingers flexed, her lips pressed thin. She wasn't breaking. She was waiting. And Vance, sensing the moment slipping, only grew louder, drowning the chamber with his accusations. His voice thundered, but the more it boomed, the more desperate it began to sound. What he thought was control was already spiraling into noise. Would her voice be drowned or amplified? Jasmine didn't wait for the shouting to collapse. She leaned in, closer to the mic, her voice slicing the noise like a blade. Unfit? Tell that to veterans under bridges. Tell that to mothers with 2 jobs who can't afford health care. If defending dignity makes me unfit, I'll wear it with pride. The chamber stopped breathing. The silence after her words was heavier than the shouting before them. You could hear a pen drop, a cough stifled, the faint click of a camera zooming closer. It wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a strike that flipped the entire weight of the debate back onto Vance. His eyes darted, a flash of panic hidden behind clenched teeth. The statistics he had hurled now sounded hollow, lifeless, compared to her raw truth. Numbers were cold. Her words bled heat, pain, and humanity. And everyone in that chamber felt the difference. On the Capitol Plaza, the reaction was instant. The crowd erupted, a rolling wave of cheers that shook the barricades. A man in a construction vest thrust his fist into the air, shouting through tears. A woman clutched her chest, whispering, "Finally, someone said it." Strangers turned to each other, hugging, sobbing, smiling. Inside, reporters fumbled with their phones, desperate to clip her speech before it was over. Headlines shifted in real time. Crockett turns unfit into fire. Hashtags sparked across screens, climbing to the top of social feeds before the moment had even ended. It wasn't just testimony anymore. It was a movement in motion. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her voice rose steady, iron wrapped in flame, as if she were speaking not only to the senators before her, but to every American listening. She had taken their weapon, the word meant to break her, and forged it into armor. Could one voice carry millions? The chamber held still, the echo of Jasmine's final words clinging to the marble like smoke after fire. For a long beat, no one moved, no one breathed. Then from the far side of the room, an independent senator slowly pushed back his chair. He rose to his feet and began to clap, one sharp strike of the hands, echoing like a starter pistol. Heads whipped around. Gasps broke the silence. The lone clap was defiant, almost dangerous, as if it might shatter the fragile order of the chamber. But then another senator joined him, and another. Soon the sound rippled, spreading down the row like sparks leaping from one branch to another. Within seconds, the applause had become a storm. Hands slammed together with force, drowning out the low protests of J.D. Vance. He tried to shout over it, his mouth wide, his fist pounding the table. But the roar of approval swallowed him whole. Every attempt to claw back control vanished beneath the tidal wave of noise. The cameras caught every frame. Vance's flushed face tightening, his lips moving without sound. The disbelief etched into his features as the very chamber he thought he commanded turned against him. The spotlight he had seized was gone, ripped from his grasp and handed to Jasmine. Up in the gallery, a camera panned to a widow clutching a folded flag. Her hands trembled, her eyes glistened, and with a breaking voice she whispered, "She fights for my boy's legacy." That single sentence carried further than any statistic, any insult, any argument made that day. The applause swelled again, spilling past the chamber doors, picked up by the crowd outside. Chants rose, echoing off the stone walls of the Capitol, transforming the hearing into something unplanned, unstoppable. Jasmine didn't raise her arms. She didn't need to. She stood rooted in silence, letting the sound wash over her, the judgment delivered not by votes or parties, but by the people themselves. Was this debate or a verdict? Outside the chamber, the noise hit like a shockwave. The crowd on the Capitol Plaza erupted, fists in the air, voices cracking as they repeated Jasmine's words back at the giant screens. Every pause in her speech had been met with cheers, but now the applause rolled in waves, shaking the barricades as if the stone itself was alive. Across the street in a crowded cafe, the televisions glowed, and no one touched their coffee. Strangers leaned forward together, eyes locked on the broadcast. A man in a suit whispered, "She said what we've all been waiting to hear," while a waitress wiped her eyes with the edge of her apron, forgetting she was still holding a tray. In a quiet church basement, elders gathered around a small TV set, their heads nodding in rhythm to every sentence. At a community center, teenagers huddled over their phones, streaming the hearing and gasping in unison. From living rooms to factory break rooms, millions stopped midday, frozen by the force of her words. It wasn't just support, it was connection. For once, people weren't divided by who they voted for or where they lived. They were bound by the same feeling, a surge of pride and a recognition of struggle, as if one voice inside that chamber had somehow reached into every corner of their lives. On the plaza, a chant began, soft at first, then louder until it rolled like thunder. "Fit to fight! Fit to fight!" It climbed the steps, poured through the walls, and found its way back inside. What had started as a hearing was becoming something else entirely, a moment stitched into memory. Had America just witnessed history repeat? J.D. Vance slammed his palm on the desk, shouting numbers, shouting warnings, shouting anything he could grab. But his voice never landed. The chamber was already gone, swallowed by the roar of hands clapping, boots stomping, voices chanting from outside. Every word he tried to force out dissolved in the storm. He raised his volume, veins straining, face blazing red. Cameras caught his mouth moving furiously, but the microphones fed back only noise, drowned under the tide of approval for the woman across from him. His arguments, his rage, his facts were nothing but static now. And Jasmine, she didn't move. She didn't lift a hand or raise her voice. She sat rooted, eyes burning, cheeks damp with emotion she refused to hide. Her silence grew heavier than his rage, pressing against the walls, pressing against him, until it became unbearable. Reporters noticed first. Pens stopped. Cameras zoomed in. Commentators whispered, "She's saying more by saying nothing." The power had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Her silence was not weakness. It was defiance sharpened to a blade. The longer she held it, the louder it became. That silence carried across the chamber, across the plaza, across living rooms where millions sat glued to screens. It was louder than rage, louder than insult, louder than fear. It was victory, contained in stillness. Could silence be louder than rage? The chamber's roar spilled onto every screen in America. Within minutes, clips of Jasmine's stand flooded feeds, edited, shared, replayed in slow motion. A single word, unfit, transformed into fire, her response stitched into headlines. The hashtag shot to the top of every platform, glowing on millions of phones at once. Unfit for cruelty. Comment sections erupted. Some typed through tears, "She spoke for us." Others fired back with anger, but their words were buried under the avalanche of support. Talk radio hosts cut in live. Anchors on every network replayed the moment on loop. America wasn't just watching anymore. It was talking, arguing, choosing sides. In diners, workers leaned over counters, eyes glued to the small TV above the grill. In city buses, passengers pressed phones close, sharing earbuds to hear every line. A factory floor in Detroit turned quiet as machines slowed, workers circling one phone, whispering, "She said it out loud." Finally, everywhere, the conversation spilled past politics. It wasn't about parties. It was about dignity, about who deserved to be called American. Jasmine's words had ripped something open, and once open, it could not be shut again. J.D. Vance had hurled his insult to end a career. Instead, it unleashed a chorus. Jasmine wasn't just speaking anymore. She had been amplified into the voice of millions. Would this moment fade or spark a movement? The gavel finally struck, ending the hearing, but the energy refused to die. As Jasmine rose from her seat, The chamber buzzed with the echo of applause still ringing in the marble. The cameras followed her every step, capturing a woman who had walked into the room accused and was now leaving as something far greater. The doors swung open, and the outside world swallowed her whole. The crowd surged forward, spilling past barricades, voices breaking as they chanted her name. Cell phones lit the plaza like a field of stars, every screen trying to capture the moment they knew would be replayed for years. In the crush of bodies, a silver-haired veteran pushed through. His hands shook as he reached for her, the folded flag in his arms pressed tightly against his chest. He embraced her with trembling strength, leaning close so only she could hear, "You're fit for America." Her eyes closed for a beat, her breath catching as the words sank in. For all the shouting, all the fury, it was this whisper that cut deepest. The cameras caught it, her hand on his shoulder, the quiet tears sliding down her cheek. It was raw, it was human, and it was undeniable. The crowd thundered again, chants rolling like drums, and the footage slowed in the edit rooms, ready to be broadcast with soaring music that would cement it as legend. What had begun as an insult was now a coronation. Had the word unfit just been rewritten? Night fell quiet over Washington. The crowds had gone home, the cameras packed away, but Jasmine remained awake. Alone in her office, the glow of the city lights spilled through the blinds, catching the edge of her face as she sat in silence. Her thoughts wandered back. Her grandfather chased from marches, her mother humiliated for demanding equal pay. She pictured their faces, worn but unbroken, and wondered what they would say if they had seen her tonight. Would they recognize themselves in her? Would they be proud that she had carried their scars into the chamber and turned them into fire? Across America, the footage replayed. In a factory break room, tired workers leaned in close, smiling faintly as Jasmine's voice rang from a small screen. On a farm kitchen table, a family paused dinner to watch, the father nodding slowly as his children listened. In a modest apartment, a widow with a folded flag on her lap whispered, "She spoke for him." The images multiplied. Construction workers, veterans, immigrants, teachers, all watching the same clip, all smiling through tears or pride. For once, they weren't just viewers. They felt like part of the moment, part of the stand she had taken, and Jasmine, staring at the ceiling, felt it too. The exhaustion pressed heavy, but so did something else. Hope, alive and growing, stretching far beyond her own hands. Tonight wasn't just survival, it felt like a beginning. Was this the dawn of a new fight for justice? Her words still echoed long after the lights dimmed. Over footage of Jasmine standing firm in the chamber, a voice cut through the silence, steady and unshakable. Justice is not charity. It is the debt we owe each other as Americans. The images slowed, her stare unbroken, the veteran's tearful nod, the widow clutching her flag. Each frame lingered as if carved into memory, carrying the weight of a promise bigger than politics. This wasn't just about a hearing. It was about who the country chose to be. Then the screen went dark. A single line appeared in white letters glowing against the black. If you believe in dignity, share this story. No slogans, no campaign logos, just a challenge, plain and human. Music swelled, strings rising with the rhythm of applause still burning in the nation's ears. In living rooms, cafes, break rooms, tears welled, hands pressed over mouths, hearts pounding. Strangers reached for their phones, not to scroll past, but to share, to speak, to add their voices to hers. For a moment, the country wasn't fractured. It was connected by one scene, one voice, one word rewritten. Jasmine had turned humiliation into history, silence into power, and a chamber into a courtroom for the soul of America. Would you have stood and clapped? Even when the word unfit was hurled to break her, Jasmine turned it into strength, proving that insults can become fuel and silence can roar louder than rage. Her stand reminds us that courage is contagious and dignity must never be bargained away. If a single voice could shift a nation in that moment, what might yours change today? If this moment shook you, don't let it fade into silence. Like, share, and subscribe to First Shock, where voices rise and dignity is defended. Tap the bell, because tomorrow's fight may need yours. Which part of Jasmine's stand struck your heart the most? Drop it in the comments. Your voice is part of this story. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching.